January. The countryside near Naples lies under a brittle frost. Silence stretches across the fields, broken only by the distant cry of a bird or the whistle of the winter wind. And in the middle of this emptiness, a king stands, pointing toward the horizon. "Here," he declares, "I want the largest palace in all of Europe." This is the story of the Palace of Caserta. Not just a palace, but a monument to ambition, obsession, and the hidden cost of grandeur. On paper, it is magnificent, larger than Versailles, with more rooms than some towns have people, staircases that soar like the heavens, fountains that dance to invisible music, and gardens that seem to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. But the closer one gets, the darker the story becomes. To build such a place, money must come from somewhere. Taxes rise, peasants toil harder for less bread, and the court in Naples grows more fearful, more corrupt, more desperate to maintain appearances. The palace is no longer simply a home. It is a fortress, a statement, and a silent weapon against unrest. Decades later, armies will march through its halls. Invaders, foreign kings, clandestine deals, and candlelight conspiracies will trace paths where princes once danced. And during World War II, soldiers will sleep on the floors once polished by royal hands, while bombs fall near the fountains made for leisurely strolls. Today, tourists see only the marble, the gardens, the perfectly mirrored fountains. They do not see the fear, the debts, the broken lives hidden within the walls. The question remains, when a palace grows this immense, this heavy, this expensive, does it protect a kingdom or slowly crush it? January 1752. King Charles of Bourbon stands on a patch of soggy ground 20 miles north of Naples. The soil is soft underfoot. The air carries the scent of wet earth and distant salt from the sea. Around him, architects unroll drawings on makeshift tables, struggling against the gusts of wind that threaten to scatter their plans. Charles is 35, a man already seasoned by 17 years on the throne of Naples and Sicily. Yet even he seems consumed by a singular, monumental obsession: to build something Europe will never forget. One architect, Luigi Vanvitelli, 52 years old, with decades of experience and a reputation for meticulous control, steps forward cautiously. "Your Majesty," he begins, measured and careful. "The site—" Charles interrupts only with a smile. He knows exactly what Vanvitelli means. The land is a swamp. Roads are weak. Quarries are distant. There is no immediate workforce. Nothing about this is easy. But ease is irrelevant. The goal is Versailles. Charles grew up hearing about Versailles. It was the benchmark, the symbol of power and permanence, the unspoken proof that France was unrivaled. And yet Charles intends to challenge it, not through war or diplomacy, but through architecture. He wants a palace bigger than Versailles, longer, taller, grander. He wants ambassadors arriving in awe, understanding instantly that Naples is no minor kingdom. It is a force to be reckoned with. Vanvitelli understands. He has spent months refining plans on paper. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 symmetrical courtyards, fountains fed by aqueducts running miles into the mountains, a staircase rising like a slow theatrical crescendo. On paper, it is perfection, control, and spectacle. But on this cold January morning, staring at empty fields and distant hills, even Vanvitelli feels the weight of the impossible. This project will take decades, consume the kingdom's fortune, and demand labor on a scale Naples has never seen. Yet, As Charles signs the decree, the work begins immediately. Stone is brought from distant quarries. Villagers arrive, drawn by the promise of steady wages. Carpenters, masons, sculptors all find their place in the scaffolding forest that grows with every passing week. But the swamp fights back. Foundations are slow, water seeps into trenches, workers fall ill, and costs skyrocket before a single wall reaches its full height. Charles does not hesitate. Taxes rise, loans are taken from local banks and foreign lenders, nobles are pressured to contribute as demonstrations of loyalty. The message is clear: this palace will rise, no matter the cost. In Naples, the consequences are immediate. Bread prices climb, taxes on goods, land, and trades rise sharply, fees appear where none existed. People notice, they whisper, they grow uneasy. And then there is Antonio, a stonecutter from a nearby village. 32, married with a young daughter, still recovering from a bad harvest 2 years prior. The palace promises opportunity, work, and steady pay. Antonio walks to Caserta one cold spring morning, joining hundreds of laborers hauling stone, digging trenches, building scaffolds that creak in the wind. He does not yet realize that this work, magnificent as it is, will consume the rest of his life. Like the palace itself, Antonio's story will not be fully heard for centuries. March 2024. A train pulls into Caserta station in the afternoon. The platform is nearly empty. A few locals linger near the exit. Tourists study maps on their phones. Elena steps off slowly, a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder, a frayed notebook in hand. 29 years old, an architectural photographer from Boston, she has spent years dreaming of this moment. 3 months ago, a major client canceled her contract. 2 months ago, her rent increased. 1 month ago, she maxed out her credit card for this trip. Her friends and family think she is reckless. She knows she is chasing something meaningful. Her notebook contains years of study, palaces, estates, and great houses across Europe. Versailles, Schönbrunn, Blenheim, all carefully drawn, annotated, analyzed. But Caserta is different. On paper, it is enormous, bigger than Versailles, bigger than any royal residence still standing. 200 rooms, a facade stretching longer than 3 football fields, gardens designed to rival any French palace. As Elena walks the quiet streets toward the palace, the town feels small, modest, almost sleepy. Then she turns a corner and stops. The palace rises like a wall, not a building. Endless windows, repeated arches, stone that seems to stretch beyond sight. Photographs cannot capture this. Floor plans cannot explain it. Elena feels the palace observing her, measuring her, questioning her presence. Tourists pass, unbothered, chatting, photographing, walking into history as if it were a museum. But Elena feels something else. She feels dwarfed, overwhelmed, not just by size alone, but by ambition, history, and the countless lives sacrificed to create this marvel. The gardens, fountains, and long alleys stretch into the horizon. Every statue, every carved relief whispers stories of kings, laborers, conspiracies, and celebration. She imagines Antonio, the stonecutter, carving walls that would outlast him. She imagines the courtiers, terrified and compliant, dancing in halls that are now silent. Caserta is more than a building. It is a living testament to human desire, grand, beautiful, and terrifying. Elena realizes that to understand it, one must see it, feel it, and measure it not just in stone, but in the cost of ambition. She steps forward, notebook in hand, ready to trace the lines of history, to photograph not only what the palace shows, but what it hides. Every corridor, every marble floor, every garden pathway holds secrets of power and fear, wealth and suffering, the impossible dream of one king who wanted more than Europe had ever seen. As the sun dips behind the palace, shadows stretch across the facade, and Elena understands this palace is not merely a monument to a king, it is a mirror of human ambition, eternal and unrelenting. And like any great story, it demands witnesses who are willing to see beyond the grandeur, to feel the weight, and to remember those whose lives built it and were, in turn, consumed by it. She walks closer. The entrance courtyard of Caserta spreads before her like a stage built for kings. 4 massive wings form a perfect square around a central space so vast it could hold hundreds of people. The pale stone gleams in the afternoon sun, almost white, almost unreal. Every window is identical. Every arch is spaced with precise, unyielding symmetry. It is breathtaking. It is also cold. Elena buys a ticket from a small booth near the entrance, 15 euros, a glossy map of the palace and gardens, a notice that the gardens close at sunset. The woman behind the glass barely glances at her. Inside, the entrance hall opens into something that feels impossible. A grand staircase dominates the room, splitting into 2 arms that curve upward toward a vaulted ceiling painted with frescoes of gods, kings, and allegories. Marble stretches endlessly underfoot. Sunlight pours through towering windows, bouncing off statues carved into alcoves. A tour group gathers near the staircase. Elena drifts closer, listening. The guide is a woman in her 50s, English spoken with a thick Italian accent. She speaks of King Charles and architect Luigi Vanvitelli, of a project that consumed decades and kingdoms alike. 1,200 rooms, she says, gesturing toward the ceiling. 18 years just to make it livable. Vanvitelli died before it was finished. His son completed the work. The tourists nod politely, some taking photos.
The king wanted to rival Versailles, the guide continues, her voice both proud and weary. He wanted all of Europe to know that Naples was a power to be reckoned with. She pauses, almost casually. Of course, it nearly bankrupted the kingdom. Elena writes it down in her notebook. Nearly bankrupted the kingdom. The group moves on. Elena stays behind, staring at the staircase, the frescoed ceiling, the flawless marble columns. Her thoughts drift. Her own debts, her canceled contracts, her parents asking when she would get serious. And she wonders aloud, what does it cost to build something this beautiful? Chapter 3. A King Who Wanted His Own Versailles. The answer begins decades earlier, in a throne room where ambition outweighs gold. It is 1750. King Charles of Bourbon sits at a long table in Naples, surrounded by papers, sketches, budgets, and letters from architects across Italy. He is 33, king since 1735, when Spanish troops marched into Naples to hand him the throne. His father is King Philip V of Spain. His mother hails from the Farnese family. He grew up surrounded by palaces and paintings, absorbing the unspoken truth. Rulers are measured not just by battles and treaties, but by what they leave in stone. But Naples is not Spain. Naples is certainly not France. Foreign ambassadors arrive to a bustling, chaotic city, but the power they see is ephemeral, unconvincing. Charles decides this must change, and he knows how. Versailles haunts him, not as memory, but as idea, yardstick, challenge. Every European monarch measures themselves against it. Built by Louis XIV, Versailles is a declaration of absolute power. 100 rooms, gardens stretching miles, facades that dwarf neighboring towns. Charles has read about it, studied its plans, heard diplomats whisper its name with awe and envy. A mixture of admiration, jealousy, and quiet anger consumes him. Why should France claim the greatest palace in Europe? Why should Naples, a kingdom rooted in Roman and Greek heritage, settle for second place?
The answer is simple in his mind. It will not. Charles will build a palace larger, grander, more impressive than anything Europe has seen. He summons Luigi Vanvitelli.
In his early 50s, trained in Rome, experienced in large-scale projects, Vanvitelli has built churches, aqueducts, government buildings. He understands not only stone and water, but also kings. Charles unfurls preliminary sketches. "I want it bigger than Versailles," he says. "More rooms, longer facades, gardens that prove Naples can rival any kingdom in Europe." Vanvitelli nods. "It will require decades, Your Majesty, extraordinary labor, stone, and funds." "Naples has resources," Charles replies. Vanvitelli does not argue. Kings do not hire architects to say no. They hire them to make the impossible real. Months pass. On paper, the palace takes shape. 5 floors, 1,200 rooms, 4 internal courtyards in perfect symmetry, a grand staircase rising like a monument to geometry, a facade stretching over 800 feet, longer than Versailles itself. The numbers astound, but numbers are proof. The palace is also symbolism. It will not rise in Naples proper, a city too crowded, too unruly. It will stand 20 miles north, in the countryside near Caserta, far enough to separate court from chaos, close enough to control the city. Charles does not want only a home, he wants a statement. A space where the court gathers, governments function, ambassadors arrive and instantly understand Naples is a force, permanent, unyielding. Yet the location serves another, darker purpose. Naples is volatile. The 1647 revolt remains vivid in memory. Charles, Spanish by blood, rules Naples with caution. Should the streets rise in anger, the palace becomes a fortress, a refuge behind walls thick enough to protect both crown and court. Dream and fortress, symbol and stronghold. Vanvitelli understands, designing walls that resist time and rebellion. Chapter 4. The Swamp Beneath the Marble. Before marble can rise, the earth must be commanded into submission. March 2024. Elena wanders down a side corridor, following the tour group at a distance. The guide stops at a tall window overlooking the gardens. Sunlight streams through, warming the marble floor.
The site chosen for Caserta, the guide says, was far from ideal. Swampy, unstable land. The king demanded grandeur, but Vanvitelli had to work with nature's resistance. A tourist raises her hand. "Why not pick better land?" The guide smiles. "Because when a king decides, architects find solutions." Elena gazes out. Gardens stretch to distant hills in perfect geometric order. Green hedges, pale gravel paths, fountains catching the sunlight like liquid silver. From this vantage, it seems as though the land itself was shaped around the palace, but history tells another story. Spring, 1752. Workers arrive at the site, carrying tools, sacks, and hope. Among them is Antonio, a stonecutter from a nearby village. 32, married, with a 4-year-old daughter, Lucia. He walks toward the scaffolding forest that will define his life, his wife Maria watching from their small doorway. Antonio does not yet know that he will spend years bending his body to create a dream he may never see completed. The swamp fights back. Trenches flood, stone is heavy, foundations settle unevenly, illness spreads. The palace demands sacrifice, and it will have it, one man at a time. Antonio walks for 2 hours along a muddy path, the early morning fog clinging to his clothes. When he arrives, the construction site is a hive of chaos. Hundreds of men labor in the soft, swampy soil. Some dig trenches that vanish under spring rains. Others haul timber for scaffolding that groans under its own weight. A few skilled masons trace foundation lines with chalk and taut string. The ground is treacherous. Every step sinks slightly, the mud squelching beneath boots. Near the center, Luigi Vanvitelli moves like a conductor of a great orchestra, pointing at drawings, shouting instructions, his finely tailored clothes stained with dirt and dust. He does not seem to notice.
Around him, the palace rises slowly, yet it feels as if the land itself resists, clawing at every foundation, at every dream laid in stone. Antonio joins a crew digging trenches. The work is simple to describe, but brutal to endure. Dig down until the earth resists, remove mud and water, fill with stone and mortar, move a few feet, and repeat endlessly. Days blur into weeks. Water seeps faster than the men can remove it. The first tragedy comes quickly. A trench collapses, burying a worker alive. By the time his body is recovered, 2 days later, life has already moved on. No ceremony, no mourning. The digging continues. Vanvitelli calls for pumps, massive wooden machines operated by men walking in circles, gears turning, lifting water from the trenches. They ease the work, but cannot overcome the relentless seepage entirely. In April, the king arrives. Surrounded by guards, he steps cautiously through mud, inspecting the trenches, the scaffold skeleton, the workers caked in filth. "When will the walls begin?" he asks. "Your Majesty," Vanvitelli replies steadily, "the foundations must be perfect. If we rush, the palace will crack." Charles nods, unconvinced yet silent, and leaves within 20 minutes. The men return to the trenches. By summer, the foundations are finally complete. Massive blocks of stone begin arriving, quarried 10 miles away, each weighing hundreds of pounds. Teams of oxen drag them along dirt roads that groan beneath the weight. Antonio is promoted to stonework. His hands, skilled and precise, shape each block, trim every edge until it fits perfectly with its neighbors. The pay is slightly better, enough to send a few extra coins home to Maria and little Lucia, but the work is far harder. Stone dust coats him, filling his lungs, weighing each breath. Around him, others cough, some give up, replaced by fresh faces drawn to the promise of work. The walls rise slowly, brick layered over stone, mortar filling gaps thicker and stronger than anything Antonio has ever built. Vanvitelli moves constantly across the site, correcting measurements, praising precise work, shouting when errors appear. The men learn his moods, to avoid him when anger flickers in his eyes, to work faster when his shadow falls over their section. At night, Antonio sleeps in the barracks, a wooden structure crowded with 50 men in a space meant for 30. Straw mattresses lie packed side by side. The air smells of sweat, dust, and damp wood. By candlelight, he writes brief letters to Maria. She writes back, "Bread is more expensive. Taxes have risen. We manage, but it is hard." Antonio folds the letters carefully, keeping them close to his chest, a small comfort amidst the endless labor. Outside, the palace climbs skyward brick by brick, stone by stone. Beneath it, the swamp waits, patient, heavy, hungry. And beneath the marble, the men leave traces no architect ever draws. March 2024. Elena lingers behind the tour group, pretending to study a fresco. She wants to feel the palace without the guide's voice, without crowds. She slips down a narrow side corridor, darker, less polished, where marble floors fade into stone and gilding gives way to bare plaster. The service stairway curves downward, steps worn smooth in the center by centuries of quiet footsteps, servants, staff, laborers, people whose presence was never meant to be noticed. At the bottom, a small antechamber waits. Plain walls, a single window spilling weak light. No frescoes, no gilding, only stone and plaster, cold and unyielding. Elena notices something faint in a corner, scratches in the plaster, subtle but deliberate. She leans closer, letters, initials almost erased by time, A.M. She traces them gently with her fingertips. The plaster is cold. Who was A.M.? The year is 1755. Antonio has labored for 3 long years. Walls are now 4 stories high in some sections. The main courtyard begins to take shape, columns and arches framing the open sky. Antonio's hands are maps of scars, his back stiff from endless bending. He coughs each morning, stone dust choking his lungs, yet he continues. Many men have left, either dead, injured, or broken by exhaustion. Antonio persists for Maria, for little Lucia, for the fragile hope that effort and survival matter.
The workers' camp has grown. Wooden barracks now house 200 men, crowded, hot in summer, freezing in winter, filled with sweat, smoke, arguments, and the occasional laughter. At night, some drink cheap wine, others gamble with coins they cannot afford to lose. Antonio does none of this. He finds a corner in a quiet corridor where plaster is still soft and carves his initials with a sharpened nail. A.M. Antonio Moretti. Another young worker, Giovanni, watches. "Why bother? No one will see it," he asks. Antonio does not look up. "Someone might," he says simply. Giovanni shrugs, unconvinced, but that night he carves his own initials beside Antonio's. Over months, more names appear, hidden in service corridors, near stairwells, beneath floors soon to be sealed. Initials, dates, full names, small acts of defiance, proof that they existed, that they labored and suffered, even if history forgot them. Thousands of men now work on Caserta. Stonemasons, carpenters, painters, laborers, hauling bricks until their shoulders bleed. Nobles occasionally visit, walking through the rising courtyards, praising proportions, discussing suites they will never see occupied by ordinary men. They step around the workers as if part of the scaffolding, invisible to the palace's history. Vanvitelli measures by skill, not by names. Days pass in progress, not in faces. The king visits sporadically, impatient for completion, leaving in clouds of dust and carriage wheels. And so the men carve their names, quiet rebellions in plaster and stone. Antonio presses his initials one last time, rough, uneven, enduring. He touches them lightly, then walks away, leaving a piece of himself behind. March 2024. Elena's fingers brush over the faint A.M. She does not know if Antonio Moretti survived to see Caserta completed, if he returned home, if he lived or died in anonymity. But she knows this: he was here. For one fleeting moment, he demanded recognition from the future. She sketches the initials in her notebook, carefully marking the location: service stairway, east wing, lower level. In that quiet, hidden space, history whispers through the stone, the plaster, and the hands of those long gone. A security guard appears at the top of the stairs. "Miss, the tour group stays on the main floors." Elena starts, glancing up. "Sorry, I got lost." The guard gestures toward the staircase. She climbs back, eyes lingering once more on the faint initials carved in plaster centuries ago. For the first time, the palace feels different. Not just marble and symmetry, not merely the dreams of a king made solid. It is a monument built on lives, thousands of them. Lives that, for the most part, left nothing behind except letters pressed into walls where no one was supposed to look. Elena thinks about her own work, photographs of buildings, clean lines, perfect light, carefully framed facades. She has rarely asked who carried the stone, who fell from scaffolding, who breathed their last so she could capture the perfect shot. She slips back into the main corridor, rejoining another tour group, listening without hearing. But her notebook remains open to the sketch of A.M. This story is no longer about a king.
Yet the king's decisions still ripple outward, shaping who pays the price. It is 1756, 4 years into construction, and Caserta consumes wealth faster than Naples can produce it. King Charles sits hunched over ledgers in his office, columns of ink marching down the pages. Costs have ballooned, stone more expensive than forecast, wages rising every year. The aqueduct that will feed fountains across the grounds has grown into a second monumental project, demanding engineers, laborers, and more coin than the treasury holds. The treasurer stands nearby, sweating despite the cool morning air. "Your Majesty," he begins cautiously, "the expenses exceed the budget." "I know what they exceed. Find more money. We have already raised taxes twice. The people will adjust." The treasurer bows silently and leaves. No argument can survive in the presence of a king accustomed to the word yes.
By the next month, new levies appear on olive oil, on grain, on tools and cloth, on anything the accountants can measure. Each individual rate seems modest, insignificant, but combined they tighten slowly, coin by coin, measure by measure. Villagers feel it immediately. Bread costs more, wine costs more. Even registering a birth or a marriage demands a few extra coins. Maria, Antonio's wife, feels the pinch at home. She waters down soup, buys less meat, whispers to Lucia that they are saving for something special, though she cannot imagine what that might be. Antonio's wages remain the same, sent home faithfully month after month, buying less and less. He does not complain. Complaints do not alter stone, marble, or taxes. The palace only consumes. By 1758, the palace walls rise 5 stories in most sections. Windows punctuate the facade in endless, disciplined rows. Courtyards take shape, massive open spaces where workers gather every morning for instructions. Van Vitelli is aging, 58 now, his back stiff and eyes blurred from hours bent over drawings in dim candlelight. Yet he does not slow. The king demands speed. Van Vitelli demands perfection. Their clocks tick at different paces. One afternoon, Charles arrives without warning. Nobles follow, trailing like brightly colored shadows. They murmur among themselves, pointing at cornices and arches as if they truly understand. "Van Vitelli," the king says, halting in front of him, "when will it be ready?" Van Vitelli does not flinch. "Another decade, Your Majesty, perhaps longer." Charles's jaw tightens. That is unacceptable. Nobles fall silent, uncomfortable in the presence of a man who dares to speak truth to power. But Van Vitelli knows the site intimately. Every wall, every crack, every stubborn inch where the swamp below still pushes upward. Rush now, and the palace will leak, shift, betray generations long after they are gone. "Your Majesty," Van Vitelli continues, voice steady, "we are building the largest palace in Europe. This cannot be done quickly. It can only be done correctly." The king studies him for a long moment, then nods once sharply. Without another word, he turns and walks away. The nobles follow, their robes brushing dust from the courtyard, whispers and laughter following them like distant echoes. Van Vitelli returns to his drawings. Every line, every calculation, a reminder that ambition has limits, but integrity must have none. That night, Antonio sits outside the barracks with a dozen other workers. The air smells of damp stone, sweat, and smoke. Men talk quietly of home, of children they may never see, of debts piling up like the stones they lift daily. Others drink cheap wine or play cards for coins they cannot afford to lose. Antonio, however, does something different. He finds a quiet corner, a place where the plaster remains soft. A sharpened nail in hand, he carves his initials into the wall. A.M. Antonio Moretti.
Giovanni, a young worker with a crooked nose and a restless curiosity, watches. "Why bother?" he asks. "No one will see it." "Someone might," Antonio replies simply, not looking up. That night, Giovanni carves his own initials nearby, and in the months that follow, other men follow suit. Hidden acts of rebellion, small proofs that they existed. Names, initials, and dates etched into corners destined to be forgotten because the palace has grown too large to remember faces. Thousands now labor, stonemasons, carpenters, painters, men whose bodies bear the scars of ambition. Nobles occasionally stroll the rising courtyards, praising proportions, inspecting suites, brushing past the men who made it all possible. Vanvitelli knows them not by name, but by skill, by how they bend stone, measure mortar, resist exhaustion. And so, the workers leave marks, hidden legacies in plaster and stone. Antonio touches his initials, rough and uneven, a proof of survival, then steps away, the night swallowing both him and the trace of his existence. March 2024. Elena's fingertips linger over the faint AM carved into the wall. She does not know whether Antonio Moretti lived to see Caserta completed, whether he returned home, whether he survived the endless labor. But she knows one thing: he was here, and for one brief moment he reached into the future, demanding to be remembered. She opens her notebook, sketches the initials, marks the location carefully: service stairway, east wing, lower level. In that silent corridor, history whispers through stone, plaster, and human persistence. And Elena listens.
The men share bread and weak wine beneath the dim glow of a lantern. Voices rise and fall like whispers of smoke. "The king's visit," someone murmurs. "He looked angry," another replies. "Rich men are always angry when they don't get what they want fast enough," a third adds. Antonio says nothing. Words are heavy. His body is heavier. Yet his mind drifts to Maria's last letter, to the way Lucia's clothes hang loose and threadbare, to the rising taxes that make even a meal of bread a luxury. And then to the marble in the royal apartments, slabs of rare stone shipped hundreds of miles, each costing more than he earns in a year. That contrast sits in his chest like a stone of its own. Every night he dreams of it. What could he do? Stop? Return to a village where work has vanished? He stays, because, like the others, survival demands obedience. The palace rises above them, layer by layer, stone, sweat, and debt stacked together. In Naples, whispers of discontent ripple through the markets, the squares, the provinces. Small protests scatter under the watchful eyes of soldiers. Nothing yet threatens the kingdom, but tension coils like a spring. Charles hears the reports. He does not alter his course. The palace is his legacy, and legacies, he believes, are worth any cost. March 2024. Elena sits in a cafe near Caserta, the afternoon sun glinting off the palace's endless facade. A small cup of espresso warms her hands while her eyes skim articles on Bourbon finances. Millions of ducats poured into construction over decades. She thinks of Antonio's initials, of the men and women who labored while their families counted every coin, watered soup, skipped meat. She thinks of her own debt, credit cards maxed, lost contracts, rent overdue. Different centuries, different kingdoms, yet the pattern is the same. Someone always pays, and it is almost never the people at the top. She finishes her coffee and walks back toward the palace. The facade glows in the afternoon light, perfect, untouchable. Beneath it, she now knows, the foundation is built on far more than stone. It is 1767, 15 years into construction. Behind the silk walls, the palace has begun to breathe with life. King Charles is gone, called to the Spanish throne in 1759.
His son, Ferdinand IV, now rules Naples, a boy of 16, guided by ministers and advisors who understand power more than honor. The palace is no longer a dream, it is a functioning instrument of influence. Migration from Naples begins slowly. First, a few apartments become habitable, then entire wings fill with nobles, their families, and the invisible armies of servants required to sustain them. Among the new arrivals is Rosa, 19 years old, from a small village near Salerno. Her family is poor, struggling. When a palace recruiter passed through, her father saw a chance: steady work, a place to sleep, and one less mouth to feed. Rosa arrives in November, carrying one bag, 2 dresses, a comb, a prayer book pressed into her hands by her mother. A senior housekeeper meets her at a side entrance, a narrow, unadorned doorway meant for staff, not royalty. "You will work in the north wing," she says. "Laundry, cleaning, anything needed. Wake at 5, work until done. Do not speak to nobles unless spoken to. Enter rooms only when called. No gossip. Understood?" Rosa nods. She is led to the servants' quarters, a long attic under the slanting roof, 20 narrow beds in 2 rows. The ceiling slopes so low near the walls that standing upright is impossible. This is home for Rosa and 19 other young women, maids, laundresses, seamstresses, all invisible to the world above, all bound to the palace's silent demands. The next morning, work begins. Rosa scrubs floors until her knees burn, carries water up and down steep stairs, empties chamber pots, washes linens in icy water until her hands crack and bleed. Up close, the palace reveals another life. Public rooms are magnificent, marble, frescoes, gilded ceilings, but behind these spaces run miles of service corridors, narrow, hidden passages, steep staircases connecting secret floors, storage rooms, and kitchens that stretch endlessly. 2 worlds exist under one roof, one seen by the court, one invisible. Rosa rarely sees the nobles. When they pass through side halls, she presses herself against the wall, eyes lowered. They glide by like ghosts, oblivious, indifferent. Other servants teach her the rules: which nobles are cruel, which indifferent, which footmen expect bribes, which cooks share leftover food, how to time movements to avoid collisions, how to exist unnoticed. Rosa learns to move like a shadow, a ghost. A hierarchy governs the servants as rigorously as it does the court. Senior staff manage entire households. Footmen and valets serve directly, while maids, laundresses, and scullery workers scrub floors and pots. Rosa is near the bottom. She earns barely enough to send a few coins home each month. Yet she has food, a bed, a small measure of safety, luxuries absent in her village. At night, she lies in her narrow bed, listening to the others breathe. Some cry softly, others whisper prayers, a few snore, exhausted. She thinks of the marble halls she cleans, of the nobles gliding over floors scrubbed on her knees, of the fact that her name will never appear in palace records. She does not carve initials into plaster like Antonio. She simply works, silently sustaining the palace that towers over her. Meanwhile, the court settles into routines: meals, ceremonies, audiences, entertainments, a small city within walls. Nobles scheme, arrange marriages, compete for influence over Ferdinand, who remains young and easily swayed. Corruption flows openly. Bribes change hands over wine, favors traded quietly. Ministers enrich themselves, while peasants outside struggle under rising taxes. Nothing here is secret. It is simply accepted. Power and wealth accumulate where they already exist. The servants see all. They carry messages, overhear conversations, know which nobles drown in debt, which marriages rot from within, which ministers plot against one another. But they speak no word. Silence preserves life, for a misstep can mean expulsion, a return to villages with no work, no future. They remain invisible witnesses to a world that refuses to acknowledge them. March 2024. Elena walks through the royal apartments, now open to tourists. Velvet ropes protect frescoes and gilded ceilings. Sunlight falls across polished marble, highlighting details so precise it seems impossible someone built it by hand. She touches the smooth railing, imagining Rosa and hundreds like her moving quietly through hidden corridors, their lives unseen, their labor unrecorded. Every room, every hallway, every gleaming surface carries stories of ambition and sacrifice, of kings and nobles, of servants who built, cleaned, and endured without recognition. Elena sketches quietly in her notebook, capturing what history left in shadows. She understands now, the palace is more than a building. It is a monument to human endurance and human inequality, to dreams that soar and lives that bend beneath their weight. Elena walks slowly through the royal apartments, her footsteps muted against polished marble. Gilded furniture gleams in the soft afternoon light. Frescoes stretch across ceilings, painted with gods and allegories, angels frozen in eternal motion. Elaborate chandeliers glimmer, catching every reflection. Every surface whispers wealth, power, permanence. She does not see the attic where 20 young women once slept in narrow, slanted beds. That room is invisible to the public. She does not climb the service stairs Rosa ascended dozens of times each day, carrying buckets of water, baskets of linens, or trays of food for nobles who never noticed her. These stairs are closed to visitors. The palace shows only what it wants: beauty, majesty, triumph. The rest remains hidden, as it always has. Yet even invisible witnesses cannot remain untouched when empires rise and fall around them. The year is 1799. The palace is 47 years old, a monument of ambition and labor, silent in its grandeur. Over its entrance, 3 different flags have already flown. Ferdinand IV fled Naples in December of 1798. French armies were marching south, and revolutionary slogans echoed through the streets. The king, his family, and loyal nobles boarded British ships for Sicily. The palace stayed behind. January 1799. French troops arrive in Caserta. They do not loot, they do not burn, they simply take possession. The Parthenopean Republic is proclaimed, a fragile, fleeting experiment. 6 months of revolutionary government pass before the old monarchy returns with brutal reprisal. But during those months, the palace transforms. Rosa is 41 now, 24 years deep into service. She has cleaned the same halls, scrubbed the same floors, and polished the same marble under 3 regimes already. French officers walk the corridors. They are different than Bourbon nobles, not gentler, not kinder, but different. They sometimes speak directly to servants instead of relaying through stewards. Orders are issued with fewer ceremonies. A few officers even say, "Please." Rosa does not trust it. Politeness from powerful men is still power, just wrapped in a softer tone. The palace is a headquarters. Maps spread across tables where card games once marked idle afternoons. Soldiers sleep in royal bedrooms. Cavalry drills echo in courtyards meant for processions and carriages. Mirrors reflect uniforms instead of silk coats. The echo of boots replaces music. Rosa adapts. She always does. Orders change. Work remains. By summer, the Parthenopean Republic collapses. Ferdinand returns with an army. Reprisals are merciless. Streets of Naples are swept of suspected rebels, thousands executed. The palace stands untouched. Marble, stone, and plaster do not care which flag flies or which anthem echoes in the courtyards. Ferdinand occupies his apartments. French maps vanish. The old routines resume. Nobles return. Servants resume tasks. The palace breathes in its familiar rhythm. Rosa notes one simple truth: the marble she polishes does not remember. The turn of the wheel continues. In 1806, Napoleon's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, is crowned King of Naples. 2 years later, Joachim Murat, Napoleon's brother-in-law, takes the throne. The palace accommodates again: new courtiers, new uniforms, new languages. Rosa's hands, bent from decades of work, ache on the servant stairs. She trains younger maids, guiding them through the silent corridors and hidden kitchens, teaching them the palace's rhythms. She knows the palace better than most nobles, who glide through in embroidered shoes, unaware of the labor sustaining their world. Murat rules until 1815, then Napoleon falls. Bourbons return. Ferdinand styles himself Ferdinand I of the two Sicilies. The palace sees French revolutionaries, Napoleonic kings, Bourbon restorations. Portraits are replaced, furniture rearranged, styles refreshed, yet the structure remains. So do the servants.
Antonio's son, also named Antonio, now works at the palace. His father died in 1778, crushed beneath scaffolding during the final stages of construction. The younger Antonio is born in the workers' camp, under unfinished walls. He has never known any other home. He is not a stone cutter, but a groundskeeper. He tends gardens, trims hedges, sweeps gravel paths, clears fallen branches after storms. Healthier work than his father endured, outdoors rather than under dust-filled ceilings. Politics pass him by. Kings come, kings fall. Flags change color. Roses still need pruning. He carves no initials, writes no letters. He simply works. This is the quiet, invisible reality of the palace. For every noble, plodding influence, dozens of workers sustain the place. They are not remembered in books. No artist paints their portraits. Their names vanish from records. Yet without them, the palace is nothing more than cold stone, empty rooms, hollow grandeur. By 1820, Bourbon rule appears stable. Ferdinand governs once more. On the surface, the palace functions as designed, a symbol of authority, a seat of government, a statement to Europe that the old order endures. Underneath, tension brews. Italian unification movements gather strength. Secret societies meet in back rooms. Pamphlets circulate. Citizens whisper about constitutions, rights, and revolution. The palace, massive and unyielding, sits at the center of these currents, unknowing, indifferent, immovable. March 2024. Elena reads a timeline plaque in one of the grand halls. The dates blur together: 1799, 1806, 1815, 1860. Each year marks a shift of power, a new regime, a new king. She thinks of Rosa, Antonio, and the countless workers whose lives were defined not by speeches or decrees, but by daily survival. Wages that never stretch far enough, hands worn raw, bodies broken step by step, stone by stone. The nobles are remembered. Their portraits hang in gilded frames, their names etched into plaques. The servants are erased, ghosts in the margins of history. Elena lifts her camera, photographing the plaque. But what she longs to capture is invisible: the attic bedrooms, the service stairs, the hands that scrubbed, carried, polished, endured without recognition, the unseen backbone of the palace, the silent labor that made all else possible. For a moment, she feels the weight of all those lives pressing through the walls. The grandeur, the gilding, the frescoes, they are impressive only because of those who remain unremembered. She sketches quickly in her notebook, mapping corridors and staircases that will never appear in guidebooks, preserving shadows that no plaque ever will. The palace stands, as it has for centuries, impervious to flags, kingdoms, and revolutions. But through every regime, through every king and officer, the invisible witnesses remain. They build, they clean, they endure. Their labor is uncelebrated, their names forgotten,
Yet without them, the palace would be nothing. Not a symbol of power, not a statement to Europe, just cold stone and empty space. And in that moment, Elena understands. True history is not only in kings and battles, in flags and formal records. It is in the silent hands, the bent backs, the carved initials, the invisible lives that endure. The palace is a monument not only to ambition, but to the quiet perseverance that made it eternal. The attic where Rosa once slept, the barracks where Antonio's father took his last breath, the service corridors where invisible people walked invisible paths for entire lifetimes. Those spaces are gone, locked or repurposed into storage rooms with no names. History remembers what it chooses. For centuries it valued kings, nobles, and their ceremonies. The rest dissolved into silence. Yet some moments are too large, too urgent for even palaces to ignore. Moments when history forces its way through every door, noble and servant alike. The year is 1943. The palace is 192 years old. Its marble halls, its frescoed ceilings, its grand courtyards, all of it is about to be pressed into the service of war. The Italian campaign grinds northward. Allied forces push from Sicily. German troops entrench themselves along the peninsula. Casera sits at the crossroads of strategy, near Naples, near supply routes, rail lines, and roads. Its walls are too strong, its corridors too vast to remain untouched by history's hand. In September, Allied forces occupy the palace. Almost instantly, the building is transformed. The Supreme Allied Command for the Mediterranean Front, AFHQ, makes its home here. American and British officers take over royal apartments. Radio equipment hums across ballrooms once reserved for banquets. Maps, detailed and sprawling, cover walls where mythological frescoes once portrayed calm skies. Desks built from ammunition crates rest on polished marble floors. Military communications snake through corridors that once echoed with chamber music and court gossip.
General Dwight Eisenhower establishes an office. Field Marshal Harold Alexander sets up headquarters nearby. Hundreds of officers, clerks, messengers, radio operators, cooks, and aides inhabit the palace. It becomes the nerve center of Allied operations in Italy. Every room repurposed for the war effort. The building, designed for splendor, now functions as a machine of logistics, strategy, and human endurance. The palace, however, is not only a headquarters, it becomes a shelter. Naples is under bombardment. Refugees flee to Casera. The palace, massive, stone, and ancient, feels safer than crumbling apartment blocks or makeshift wooden homes. Families occupy courtyards. They sleep in alcoves. They cook over improvised fires, tending gardens that were once measured for royal promenade. Fountains that reflected silk drapes now witness tin pots and soot-streaked children. The building adapts, becoming a place it was never intended to be, a haven for ordinary people. Caterina arrives in October, 72 years old, clutching her grandson Marco's hand. Her home in Naples was destroyed by bombs. Her son, Marco's father, lies dead in North Africa, another casualty of a war he never fully understood. Caterina spreads a blanket across the east courtyard, marble once polished to mirror candlelight from royal ceremonies, now cold beneath her hands. Marco, 8, lies on the blanket at night, staring at the palace walls rising around him. 5 stories of stone, unyielding, endless black rectangles where windows sleep in the dark. He imagines a giant watching over them. Caterina knows the truth. Buildings do not protect, they endure. People live or die beneath them. War presses on.
Battles rage north of Casera. The palace fills with more officers bent over maps, more refugees searching for shelter. Military discipline collides with human desperation under ceilings painted for kings, mirrored in floors polished by anonymous hands decades before.
In April 1945, history bends inside the palace once more. In the throne room, where Bourbon kings once received ambassadors, German officers signed the instrument of surrender for Axis forces in Italy. The war ends here, in a palace built for absolute monarchy, on marble laid by men like Antonio, who never lived to see its completion. The ceremony is brisk, precise. Most attendees do not consider symbolism. Officers focus on logistics, orders, troop movements. Refugees outside wonder only if they have homes left, if their families survive. Yet the building absorbs it all. The stone would speak of kings and servants, nobles and workers, power shifting hands repeatedly while walls stand unmoved, indifferent witnesses to human ambition, suffering, and resilience. March 2024. Elena stands in the throne room. The plaque describes the 1945 surrender in formal, measured words. She notices the sunlight catching gilded frames, spilling across polished marble, highlighting details the war never erased. Her mind, however, drifts to the invisible, the maids who polished the floors Rosa once scrubbed, the stonecutters whose labor built these walls, the anonymous hands that carried the palace through centuries of upheaval, rebellion, occupation, and war. She imagines Caterina and Marco huddled on the marble floor, the echo of Allied boots replacing chamber music, the smell of gunpowder mingling with faint traces of candle wax. She thinks of the palace as both shelter and stage, a witness to suffering and strategy, grandeur and desperation. Elena steps closer to a window overlooking the main courtyard. She watches the light bend over the marble like time itself folding back over history. The palace is not simply a monument to power. It is a repository of human lives, visible, invisible, celebrated, forgotten. Every generation leaves its trace, some in gilded hallways, some carved into plaster, some etched only in memory. The attic bedrooms, the service corridors, the barracks, they may be gone, repurposed, locked away, but the palace remembers. Its walls carry the weight of all who lived, worked, and survived within them. Its floors remember every footstep, soldiers, nobles, refugees, servants. Its ceilings echo the laughter, the cries, the commands, the whispered prayers of centuries. And for a fleeting moment, Elena feels the full enormity of it. The palace is larger than any king, any war, any rebellion. It is larger than even herself, yet every story within it, the lives of Caterina and Marco, of Rosa and Antonio, of unknown maids and stonecutters, threads through the stone, making the building more than cold walls. It is a living memory, a testament to endurance. She photographs the throne room, capturing the plaque, the windows, the gilded ceilings. But in her mind's eye she sees more. The refugees huddled beneath arches, the officers sprawled over maps, the servants slipping silently along hidden corridors, the sweat, the exhaustion, the courage of everyday people. The palace holds all of it, the history that mattered and the history that almost no one remembered. The palace, once a symbol of kings, has become a witness to humanity itself. And through the centuries, one lesson is clear. History may choose what to value, but it cannot erase those who endured, who labored, who survived. The walls remember, and so must we. A small black and white photograph shows American officers standing roughly where Elena is now. The throne room is empty except for her and a lone security guard near the door.
Tourists had passed through earlier, their voices echoing off marble and fresco, but for the moment it is quiet. She tries to imagine it as it once was, the static of radios, the clatter of typewriters, cigarette smoke curling under painted ceilings, officers in uniform issuing orders that could change lives.
The weight of that moment, the end of years of killing and destruction unfolding here in a room originally built for kings to impress visiting dignitaries, presses down on her. The palace has been many things: royal residence, military headquarters, refugee shelter, witness to surrender. And yet through all of it, the marble stayed, the frescoes survived, the facade held its shape. Buildings outlast the people who use them. That is what they do. They swallow history, showing only smooth surfaces back to the world. Elena thinks of Caterina and Marco. Did they survive the war? Did they return to Naples when the bombs stopped? Or did they become two more lost names in a palace already full of forgotten lives? There is no plaque for them, no photograph, no line in the official timeline. History remembers generals, kings, exact dates of surrenders. It forgets the woman and the boy sleeping on cold marble in a courtyard, counting nights until the explosions stopped. She raises her camera, hesitates, lowers it again. What could she capture? An empty room? A spotless floor? Stone that refuses to betray what it has seen? She leaves the throne room. Behind her, the guard shifts his weight and glances toward the doorway. The palace waits. It has always been good at waiting. Time, however, is patient too. Stone, no matter how grand, cannot wait forever. The 1950s arrive. War is over. The palace is still standing. Peace brings a different kind of destruction. The Italian Republic has no need for a royal palace. The monarchy ended in 1946. The Bourbons are history. Caserta becomes a relic, expensive, impractical, and far too large for any simple purpose. The state assumes ownership. Bureaucrats sit in dim offices, papers stacked in teetering towers, debating the fate of 1,200 rooms. Suggestions fly: convert parts into government offices, turn it into a museum, or, whispered almost shamefully, demolish it. Demolition never happens. The palace is too important, too beautiful, too entwined with Italian identity. But importance does not pay for repairs.
By the 1960s, decay begins. Not suddenly, not catastrophically, but slowly, inexorably. A leak here, cracked plaster there, paint flaking from ceilings where gilding once gleamed. Water stains the marble, seeping through tired roofs and neglected gutters. Restoration occurs in fragments, a project here, a patch there, limited budgets always tugging at ambitions. Political priorities shift elsewhere. A young country rebuilding itself cannot spare endless funds for an old royal dream. Some rooms are restored and open to tourists, others stay locked, unsafe, neglected, waiting. The gardens fare worse. Hedges overgrow, fountains fall silent, gravel paths crack and twist. A landscape once sculpted with meticulous precision becomes a wilder, untamed version of itself. Vandalism creeps in. Graffiti stains once pristine walls. Thieves pry loose ornate elements to sell abroad. Homeless families seek shelter in locked wings. Security is minimal. Where soldiers once patrolled, now only a skeleton staff remains. In 1997, UNESCO declares Casera a World Heritage Site. The label brings attention, grants, and political pressure. Some restoration happens, some ceilings are stabilized, some frescoes are cleaned. Yet the palace is too vast, too complex. Every room demands unique expertise. Frescoes require careful cleaning. Marble calls for specialists. Hidden structural weaknesses need engineers to unravel decades of wear. The list of needs is endless. A small, devoted staff fights against time and decay. Curators, conservators, guards, and groundskeepers. They love the palace. They dedicate careers to it. But love does not stop a roof from leaking. March 2024. Elena follows a guide through corridors usually off-limits to visitors. The guide, Julia, is a restoration specialist, agreeing to show Elena the palace behind the velvet ropes. They walk beneath scaffolding holding up sagging ceilings, a forest of metal poles looming overhead. Plastic tarps hang like veils, hiding frescoes that have waited 15 years for care. Buckets catch slow drips from the ceiling. Dust motes float in shafts of light, dancing like tiny ghosts. This section has been waiting for full restoration for 15 years, Julia says. Her tone is calm, factual, without bitterness. She gestures at the ceiling above, where cracks run like veins, fragile yet defiant. Elena imagines the workers, past and present, who once climbed these halls, carrying plaster, water, and tools, all while the palace silently observed them.
Elena's eyes trace the scaffolding upward, through the tarps, and she sees not just the decay, but the potential. The palace still waits, still endures, and in the quiet corridors she senses the echoes of all who pass through, servants like Rosa, stonecutters like Antonio, officers, refugees, tourists, historians. Each left a trace, some carved in walls, some in memory, some invisible to history but essential to the palace's continued life. She pauses near a bucket, catching drips from above, the sound sharp in the silence. History, she realizes, is not only what survives on plaques or in photographs. It is the smell of wet plaster, the echo of footsteps, the subtle tilt of floors after centuries of use. The palace's story is layered in stone, marble, and human effort, a tapestry of survival that refuses to be flattened by time. Elena steps back. She knows she will never capture it all in her camera. The image she seeks is not in a frame, but in her understanding. The palace is too large to save in total, too rich with human life to reduce to pristine surfaces. And yet, like history itself, it endures, it waits, it witnesses, and it quietly refuses to be forgotten. Elena tilts her head back to look at the ceiling. A painted sky stretches above her, gods and clouds frozen in mid-motion, half erased by water stains that creep from the edges, and mold that whispers its slow invasion. The fresco, once vivid, now seems haunted. "What happens if it isn't restored?" she asks quietly. Julia shrugs, a small, precise gesture. Eventually, it collapses. The fresco goes. The room closes, forever. They move down a corridor into a smaller chamber. Conservators lean over a damaged wall painting, tools and brushes spread around them like a surgeon's tray. Two people, hours of painstaking work to cleanse a few square inches. One of them, a young man named Luca, looks up as they enter. Pigment flecks cling to his fingers. Glasses smudged, pushed up repeatedly with the back of his hand, he squints at the damage. "How long have you been working on this room?" Elena asks. 8 months, Luca replies without hesitation. "If funding continues, maybe another year." "If," Elena echoes, tasting the uncertainty in the word. "Grants are renewed annually," Luca says, voice low, matter of fact. "Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't." Elena watches as he returns to the painting. Every movement is measured, microscopic. A lift of a brush, a delicate press of a tool, removing centuries of soot and smoke without disturbing the fragile paint beneath. The care feels almost religious, a prayer performed with bristles and patience. "Why do you do this?" she asks softly. Luca pauses, brush frozen in midair. He considers her question for a moment. "Because if we don't, no one will. This," he gestures at the wall, at the centuries layered in paint, dust, and history. "Someone spent their life creating it. It deserves a chance to survive." Julia leads Elena back toward the public areas, passing locked doors, roped-off corridors, rooms not ruined yet but unsafe, spaces waiting for funding that may never arrive. The palace is a World Heritage Site.
On paper, Julia says, it belongs to humanity. But humanity does not pay electricity bills. The Italian state does what it can. Donations help, but it is never enough. They stop at a window overlooking the gardens. From here, the palace looks eternal, perfect, symmetrical, a postcard of absolute power and beauty. Tourists see only that. They do not see the hidden cracks, the water damage behind closed doors, the sagging ceilings, or the rooms waiting for decades of care. They do not realize how close the palace comes again and again to being lost entirely.
Elena thinks of Antonio's carved initials, Rosa scrubbing floors, the refugees sleeping under open courtyards, Caterina and Marco huddled together, waiting for bombs to stop. She thinks of all the lives this building has quietly absorbed, and how now, in the 21st century, the building itself is fragile, reliant on people like Julia and Luca, who spend their days navigating bureaucracy, chasing grants, fighting public indifference. "Does it ever feel hopeless?" Elena asks. Julia smiles, a small, worn smile that carries decades of devotion. "Sometimes," she admits. "But then we save one fresco, we stabilize one ceiling, reopen one room that's been closed for years, and for a moment, it feels worth it." They walk through the grand halls, sunlight spilling through stained glass, illuminating gilded details. Tourists snap photos, children rush ahead of parents, voices echoing like music. Everyone looks up at the glittering chandeliers, the painted ceilings. No one notices the plastic sheathing behind closed doors. No one sees Luca, bent over a wall, working millimeter by millimeter. The palace shows its perfect face to the world. The struggle to preserve it, the devotion that prevents it from crumbling, remains invisible, as it always has. The next morning, Elena returns. Julia waits in a small office tucked behind the gift shop. The room is cramped. Metal desks buried under stacks of paper, a humming computer that looks ancient, chipped mugs of cold coffee. Julia speaks rapidly on the phone, voice tense, clipped. Elena waits. When Julia hangs up, she exhales, slow and deliberate. "Grant problems?" Elena asks from the doorway. "Always grant problems," Julia says, gesturing to the mountain of paperwork. "Regional government approved funding for the East Wing roof. Now they need more documentation before releasing the money. More forms, more signatures, more delays." She waves Elena inside. "You wanted to talk more about the restoration work?" Elena sits in a plastic chair across the desk. "I want to understand why you stay, why you keep fighting for this place when it seems impossible." Julia leans back. She is 53, a lifetime tied to Casera. She started as an intern and never left. "I grew up in Casera," she begins, "not the palace, the town. My grandmother brought me here. We didn't have money for trips, but the gardens were free on Sundays. We walked them every week." A faint smile touches her lips. "She told me stories about her grandfather, who worked here on the maintenance crew in the late 1800s. I never met him. He died before I was born. But I was proud. My family kept this place alive, even in small ways." Julia gestures at the desk. "I studied art history at university. I could have gone to Rome, Florence. Any museum needs staff. But I came back. This palace feels like part of my family's story. I could not watch it fall apart from a distance." Most of her work is not glamorous. Hours wrestling with paperwork, bureaucracy, grant applications, budget spreadsheets, meetings with officials more concerned with headlines than ceilings. But sometimes Julia can touch history and hold it. A fresco stabilized, a ceiling secured, a room reopened. Each small victory is monumental, though invisible to most visitors. Elena thinks about the generations who worked here, the invisible, the forgotten, the people who refused to let it die. Antonio, Rosa, Caterina, Marco, and now Julia, Luca, and the small team who dedicate their lives to keeping centuries-old stone from surrendering to time. Each is a quiet sentinel, preserving the past in the present, invisible to the world, but essential to the palace's survival.
Last year, Julia oversaw the restoration of a fresco in the north wing. Water had gnawed at the plaster, paint flaking like autumn leaves, chunks of wall crumbling under the persistent damp. Emergency funding had to be scraped together, specialists flown in, months of delicate work orchestrated to save it. 6 months later, scaffolding taken down, Julia had stepped back onto the floor, eyes tracing the newly vibrant figures. The colors blazed again. The lines of gods and clouds, once ghostly and cracked, shone as if freshly painted. "This has another 100 years now," she whispered to herself. "Maybe more." She turned to Elena. "That's why I stay, for the moments when something is no longer dying." Luca, the young conservator Elena had met the day before, appeared in the doorway. He was 29, lean, with paint staining his hands and a thin layer of dust across his shirt. "Julia," he said, voice careful, "the supplier is asking about payment for the restoration materials. The invoice is overdue again." Julia closed her eyes briefly. "Tell them it's processing," she said softly. "The payment should arrive next week." Luca nodded and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Elena and Julia in the quiet hum of the office. "We are always behind," Julia said, quietly, almost to herself. "The government pays eventually, but slowly. Suppliers are patient, they know we have no alternatives. Still, it's exhausting." "How many people actually work on restoration here?" Elena asked. Julia paused. "Maybe 20 directly involved in conservation. Conservators, technicians, a few engineers. Specialists are brought in from other cities for large projects. But the core team, it's tiny, too small for a palace this size." She opened her laptop and swiveled it toward Elena. Before and after photographs blinked on the screen. A ceiling blackened by centuries of smoke, then revealed in brilliant blues and golds. A marble floor fractured into impossible cracks, then repaired, polished until it gleamed. A damaged statue, painstakingly reassembled piece by piece. Months, sometimes years, dedicated to a single project, each dependent on grants that could vanish without notice. "People ask why we bother," Julia said, voice low, almost weary. "They say, it's only a palace, a place where rich people lived. Why spend money here when there are modern problems to solve?" She closed the laptop. "I understand that argument, truly. But this palace isn't just about kings or nobles. It's about the thousands who built it, the servants who kept it running, the refugees who slept here when war tore through Naples. Every stone, every fresco, every brick is a record of human effort across centuries." She stood and walked to the window. Below, the courtyard spread wide, pristine, almost theatrical. Tourists moved across marble paths, children chasing pigeons between columns, voices carrying in the cool afternoon air. "If we let it crumble," Julia said, "we lose that record. We lose the stories, not only of those at the top, but of everyone." Elena thought of Antonio's initials carved into plaster, Rosa's endless climbs up servant stairs, Caterina and Marco sleeping on cold marble under the war-torn sky. Those lives existed because the building endured. If Caserta fell, their stories would vanish with it. "Does it ever feel like enough?" Elena asked. "All this work you do?" Julia turned from the window. Her face was lined, tired, but resolute. "No," she said, "it never feels like enough. The palace is too vast, the problems too many, money always too little. But we do what we can, one room at a time, one fresco at a time. We try to keep it alive long enough for the next generation to decide it's worth saving too." Outside, a tour group gathered in the courtyard. A guide began reciting the official history. Tourists scribbled notes, raised phones, framed selfies with the perfect backdrop. They saw the beauty, marble floors, gilded railings, endless symmetry. They did not see Julia's chipped mug, Luca's stained hands, the unpaid invoices, the grant applications waiting on crowded desks. They saw the result. The fight behind it stayed hidden, quiet, stubborn, necessary, because some things are worth saving, even when it feels impossible.
A palace reflected in one life. March 2024. Elena's last evening at Caserta. The palace closes to tourists at 6, but she lingers in the gardens until the guards politely, almost apologetically, suggest she leave. The light is golden, filtering through trees planted centuries ago. Fountains lie still. Their water catches the low sun like molten bronze. She finds a bench near the far end of the central axis, the view stretching across the vast courtyard. The facade of the palace extends endlessly, 5 stories of rigid symmetry, hundreds of windows reflecting the soft evening sky. From this distance, it seems eternal, untouchable. But Elena knows better now. She opens her notebook, pages crowded with sketches and notes, Antonio's initials etched in plaster, the attic where Rosa slept, the throne room where surrender was signed, Luca's paint-stained hands, Julia's stubborn, tired smile. For days she has returned to the same question. Why did she really come here? What was she truly searching for? 3 months ago, when her long-term client canceled a contract, the ground had seemed to vanish beneath her feet. She had carefully built her career, each project a step on the ladder, and yet something was missing. Here, among walls that held centuries of labor, suffering, artistry, and resilience, Elena finally understands. She came looking not for grandeur, but for perseverance. Not for kings, not for gold, not even for stories that survive history books, but for the quiet courage of those who refuse to let something die, who give their lives to the survival of what others might forget. She closes the notebook and leans back on the bench. The palace glows in the fading light, a monument not just to royalty, but to every person who made it live, who kept it alive, who refused to let time erase it. Elena thinks of the countless hands that swept floors, carried stone, brushed pigment, navigated bureaucracy, and still do. In the golden silence of the gardens, she realizes the truth. Some things, people, places, stories, are worth saving even when it seems impossible. And sometimes it is enough to witness that struggle, to see it, to remember it. The palace waits. It always has. And some lives, quietly, persist alongside it. Solid portfolio, good reputation, steady income, and then nothing. Her parents called it irresponsibility. Her friends called it bad luck. Elena called it failure. She had always pushed herself harder than anyone else seemed to think necessary. Long hours, impossible deadlines, saying yes to every project because saying no felt dangerous, even career-threatening. She photographed buildings beautifully, chasing perfect lines and perfect light, but in all her focus on composition, on perspective, on shadow and color, she had never asked who mixed the concrete, who climbed the scaffolding, who cracked their back hauling stone, brick by brick, day by day. Casera had been her escape, a dream to tick off a list, the biggest palace in Europe, the perfect hero image for her portfolio. Now, watching the sun slide behind distant hills, she realizes the palace has given her something far more profound. Antonio, a stonecutter who spent years shaping blocks for a building he would never own, never see completed, never fully understand. He carved his initials into soft plaster, a quiet rebellion, a mark that said, "I was here." He sent his wages home to a family he rarely saw.
He died when scaffolding collapsed, crushed beneath walls that would outlive him by centuries. Only Maria and Lucia mourned in any official sense. Rosa, 19 years old, sleeping in an attic with 19 other women, scrubbing floors for nobles who never learned her name, climbing servant stairs until her hands curled, her back ached, her life invisible. She existed inside a palace meant to be admired from miles away, yet she remained unseen.
Caterina and Marco, refugees lying on blankets in a courtyard during a war, cold marble beneath them, distant bombs shaking the earth, looking up at walls that could not protect them from hunger or grief, surviving simply because there was no other option. Julia, wrestling with grants, invoices, leaking roofs, saving one fresco at a time, spending decades on work that will never truly be finished, staying because her grandmother's grandfather once maintained this place, because someone has to care, because love and memory sometimes demand stubborn action, even in the face of bureaucracy, scarcity, and exhaustion. Different centuries, different problems. The same thread runs through all of them. People pouring themselves into something larger than themselves. People working on projects they will never see completed. People paying prices that others will never notice. Elena glances down at her notebook, at the cramped, messy handwriting. She thinks about her own maxed-out credit card, about the career she believed unshakable until it collapsed like Antonio's scaffolding. The polished facade of her life, the confident portfolio, the hero images, the carefully curated website, had masked nights spent awake, unanswered proposals, jobs taken for half rate, debt mounting silently, fear unspoken. She had been so intent on building an impressive image that she never asked at what cost and for whom. The palace cannot answer that question, but it can push her to ask it again, over and over. In every carved initial, in every unmarked servant's bed, in every courtyard where people waited out shelling they could not control. The real question is not how to build something grand. The real question is, what do we owe the people who build it? And what do we owe ourselves while we are building? Elena closes the notebook. The sun touches the ridge of the hills. The palace facade turns amber, rose, then slowly cools to gray. A guard approaches along the gravel path.
"Signorina, we are closing the gardens," he says politely. Elena nods. She stands, taking one last long look at the palace. It is still beautiful, but beauty is no longer the point. The point is the weight behind it, the lives layered into it, the stories it holds, even when no one is listening. Her footsteps crunch softly on the gravel as she walks toward the entrance. Tomorrow she flies back to Boston, back to debt, uncertainty, and a career that must be rebuilt from the ground up. But something inside her has shifted. She cannot name it yet. She only knows it is there. The palace has taught her a hard lesson. Nothing grand is built without a price. The choice is whether to acknowledge that price or pretend it does not exist. Elena has spent years pretending, photographing flawless facades, never asking who was exhausted, broke, or broken to make them possible. She cannot unknow what she has seen. She does not know exactly what comes next, but she knows it must begin with honesty. Seeing the whole structure, not just the front, refusing to let the facade stand in for the truth. The guard locks the garden gate behind her. The palace disappears into evening shadow, but Elena carries it with her. Not the perfect postcard image she thought she wanted. The real story, the darker story, the one with weight, struggle, and the human lives that keep it alive. Small hands,
Big work. March 2024. Elena's last morning in Caserta. She does not return to the palace. Instead, she walks to the same cafe where she drank espresso days ago. Laptop open, notebook beside it, fingers hovering over keys. She writes, not an artist's statement, not a portfolio blurb, something different, something honest. An email to Julia.
She types slowly, deletes, rewrites. Asking for help has never come naturally to her. Asking to be part of something larger than herself has been even harder. And yet, she writes. She explains she is an architectural photographer, specializing in historical buildings. She wants to tell Caserta's story, not the polished tourist version, but the real one. The story of the workers, the servants, the hidden costs, and the people who still carry them today. She offers to create a photo essay for free, paying her own way. A week, maybe 2, capturing restoration work, damaged sections, scaffolding, buckets catching leaks, and the people like Luca and Julia who fight every day to keep the palace standing. Elena imagines the photos. Luca bent over a fresco, brush lifted in a silent prayer. Julia signing grant forms at a desk stacked with decades of bureaucracy. The scaffolding rising like a skeleton through abandoned corridors. The polished marble floors, the water-stained ceilings, the stories written in stone, plaster, and paint. This is her offer, to honor the unseen labor, the invisible courage, to shine a light on small hands and big work, to witness what history has tried to hide. She pauses, fingers hovering over send. Her heart races, but she types anyway. She cannot predict the reply. She cannot guarantee she will be accepted. She cannot control whether her work will matter. But she has started. She has acknowledged the price. She has refused the facade. She hits send. Outside, the sun rises over the palace again, gilding windows, catching in fountains, brushing trees planted centuries ago. Elena sips her coffee, watching the world wake. And she understands, finally, that the story she wants to tell, the one hidden behind grandeur, marble, and polished appearances, is not only about the palace. It is about all of us who build, who endure, who give, and who fight to preserve what matters, even when the work is invisible. The palace will remain, the stories will endure, if someone sees them, if someone carries them forward. Elena has decided she will be that someone, even if only for a while. And that is enough to begin. Elena sits in the cafe, fingers hovering over her laptop. She reads the email one last time. Yes, come back. We need people to see this. Julia's words feel heavier than any invoice, more grounding than any contract. Not quite hope, not quite certainty, but something moving toward both. She knows what saying yes will mean. Paying for the return trip herself, explaining to her parents why she's going back to Italy instead of chasing new clients in Boston, admitting out loud that she is choosing work that will not pay the bills. That part frightens her more than any failed project ever did. She has spent her adult life measuring value by invoices, by retainers, by whether rent cleared on time. But the palace has shifted something in her. Antonio carved his initials into plaster, knowing no one important would ever see them. Rosa scrubbed floors, hands curled, knowing no one would thank her. Julia wrestles with forms, grants, ceilings that leak, knowing the palace will still demand more than she can give. They did it anyway, because doing nothing was worse. Elena opens her notebook to a blank page. She does not write a to-do list. She writes a commitment list. She will photograph Caserta, the real palace, not just the grand staircases and gilded ceilings, but the scaffolding and the water damage, the plastic sheeting hiding fragile frescoes, the rusted pipes,
the cracks spreading silently across walls. She will capture the conservators with paint-stained hands, the locked doors, the empty rooms waiting for restoration that may never come.
She will meet the people who keep it alive. Julia, Luca, the guards, the groundskeepers, anyone willing to talk about what it takes day after day to keep the palace standing. She will research the workers who built it, hunt through archives, find fragments of stories, names, pieces of history. She will search for Antonio Moretti, Rosa, and the thousands of others whose labor filled the walls, floors, and courtyards, then faded from memory. And she will create something that refuses to let the world look away, something that says, this beauty cost more than you think, and it will cost more to keep it. She has no idea if anyone will care. She does not know if a photo essay can change anything. But Julia's words echo, we do what we can, one room at a time, one fresco at a time. Elena can do one photo essay. She can tell one story. One more voice saying, this matters. It is not much, but it is something. She pays for her coffee and walks back to her hotel. In her room, she opens her laptop and searches for flights. That afternoon, she calls her mother. The conversation is exactly as hard as she imagined. Why go back, her mother asks. Why work without pay? Why chase a dream that may not exist? Elena speaks quickly, almost breathless. Antonio's initials, Rosa's attic, refugees lying on cold marble, Julia fighting for roofs and frescoes. Work worth doing, even when it does not make money. The palace, the stories it holds. Her mother is quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, your grandmother would have understood. She always said, do work that means something, even if it is hard. Elena feels a looseness in her chest she has not felt in years. I'll figure out the money, she says. I always do. You are stubborn like her, her mother replies. They talk a few more minutes. Ordinary things, weather, health, small updates. When Elena hangs up, debt still waits. Uncertainty still hovers. But she no longer feels quite so alone. She books a flight for 2 weeks from now, 1 week in Caserta, longer if the project demands it. She sends another email to Julia, confirms dates, asks what permissions are needed, which rooms are off limits, how to avoid disrupting restoration work. Julia replies within an hour, already making plans. Which rooms to show first, which staff might agree to be interviewed, which projects are urgent, honest, and visually compelling. Elena reads the email and smiles. Julia has been fighting for this place for decades. Grants, forms, ceilings, deadlines. Now she has one more ally. Small, new to palace politics, willing. Sometimes that is enough to begin. March 2024. Flight in 4 hours. Elena packs carefully, her notebook nestled beside her camera. She reviews sketches, notes, half-written captions, names carved in plaster, floors scrubbed raw, courtyards that held refugees through shelling, frescoes nearly lost to water and time, scaffolding like skeletons in abandoned corridors, rusted pipes, leaking ceilings, buckets collecting decades of neglect. She thinks about Antonio, Rosa, Caterina and Marco, Julia and Luca, about centuries of labor layered into the palace's walls. She sees the pattern now, the thread of human endurance linking hands across centuries. People who built it, people who preserved it, people who survived within it. The palace is not simply a building. It is time made tangible, history captured in stone, paint, and sweat. She closes her laptop, takes a deep breath, steps outside into the pale morning light. The streets of Casera are quiet. Shops are opening. Birds flicker across piazzas. The sky is soft, high, and clear. In her mind, the palace is already awake. Marble floors gleaming faintly under early sun, frescoes flickering with imagined candlelight. the weight of history settling into every corridor, every courtyard, every locked room. She knows what she is fighting for, not just beauty, not just art, not just the story tourists see in postcards. She fights for truth, for the lives that built the palace, for the invisible labor, the unseen sacrifices, for the one fragile thread that links human effort across centuries, for the rooms that are almost lost but not yet gone. She imagines Luca lifting his brush, dusting centuries off a fresco with tiny, meticulous movements, Julia signing yet another grant, knowing the palace will demand more than she can give, Antonio's hands scraping stone, Rosa's bent back, Caterina and Marco huddled under the marble sky. She will photograph them all. She will tell their story, not polished, not perfect, but alive, honest, necessary. The taxi arrives. She climbs in, camera bag slung over her shoulder, notebook in hand. The engine hums, tires crunch gravel, Casera slips past her window. She does not feel fear, not yet. She feels the pulse of possibility. The palace waits for her. It always has. And now, for the first time, she waits with it, ready to see the whole structure, not just the polished facade, ready to witness, to honor, to carry forward the labor and love embedded in every stone, ready to begin. Elena has time for one last walk through Casera, not the palace, not the gilded halls or marble floors, but the town itself. She wanders past the train station where she arrived 3 days ago, past cafes spilling with morning chatter, past small shops opening shutters, past apartment buildings with laundry fluttering like flags in the breeze. Ordinary life unfolds quietly in the shadow of something extraordinary. She thinks about what the palace really represents, not just a king's ambition, not just one building's history, but something larger. The palace is a lesson in endurance and erasure, in what survives and what dissolves, in who is remembered and who is forgotten.
King Charles wanted immortality. He wanted his name tied to a building so vast, so grand that Europe would never forget Naples. In a way, he succeeded. The palace still stands, tourists still flock to it. His name appears on plaques and in guidebooks. But who remembers his fears, his doubts, the nights he lay awake worrying that his dream would crumble? The palace outlived him, outlived his son, outlived the entire Bourbon dynasty. The building remained while empires around it fell. Antonio wanted proof that he existed. He carved his initials into wet plaster, A.M., 2 small letters, a subtle act of defiance against being erased. Did it work? Elena found those initials, photographed them, shared them. 270 years later, someone knows Antonio Moretti once walked those halls. For him, that is already victory. Rosa wanted security, steady work, a bed to rest her head. She got those things, but she paid in body and spirit. Decades of invisible labor, hands curled permanently, life spent serving people who never knew her name. History does not record her laughter, her secret wishes, the dreams she carried while scrubbing floors. Those details vanished with her. Yet Elena knows Rosa existed because someone always scrubs floors, washes linens, empties chamber pots, keeps the hidden machinery of a palace running. Rosa's work mattered, even if the world never thanked her. Julia wants to preserve the palace, not for glory, not for a plaque or recognition, but because letting something beautiful collapse on your watch is a failure that haunts you. She will spend her entire career fighting for a palace that will always demand more than she can give. One day she will retire. Someone else will take her place. The work will continue, or it will not. And in the future, people may stand among the ruins wondering why no one tried harder. Time does not care about intentions. It only counts what you actually do.
Elena stops in a small park near the town center. Children climb jungle gyms, their laughter bright against the low hum of ordinary life. Old men sit on benches, talking slowly, gesturing with hands knotted with years. A woman walks her dog along the path. Ordinary life, small gestures, repetitive routines, the quiet substance of human existence. It is this life, unnoticed by history, that fills the spaces between monumental events. Between palace constructions, wars, regime changes, most people simply live. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Small joys, small griefs, the vast middle ground of existence. And the palace holds all of it. Kings signing decrees, workers carving initials, servants scrubbing floors, refugees sleeping on cold marble, conservators dusting centuries off frescoes, tourists snapping selfies under crystal chandeliers. Layers of time press into stone and marble. Some marks are visible, most are not. So what does the palace teach? It teaches that power is temporary. Charles built the largest palace in Europe. Within decades, foreign armies marched through its halls. The dynasty was gone. The building survived. It teaches that beauty carries a cost. Pain leaves traces. Nothing this vast is created without broken bodies, exhausted hours, the lives of ordinary people traded for someone else's vision. The elegance of marble, the symmetry of halls, the shine of frescoes, they are paid for in sweat, in broken backs, in lives half-lived. The only real choice is whether to acknowledge that cost or pretend it does not exist. It teaches that care matters as much as creation. Charles spent decades building. Julia spends decades preserving. Both efforts are vital. Only one is celebrated. Creation is dramatic, public, dazzling. Preservation is quiet, stubborn, unseen. But without preservation, creation is wasted. Without Julia and her team, the palace would already be another pile of stones on a hillside. It teaches that invisibility is not the same as non-existence. Rosa left no letters, no portraits, no official record, but she was here. She worked. She mattered. History may erase certain people, but that does not mean their contributions vanish. It means history has been looking in the wrong direction.
And it teaches that time reveals truth. The palace was designed to intimidate, to project absolute power, to silence visitors with grandeur. But centuries of history have stripped away the illusion. Now, cracks are visible, debts are clear, bodies buried metaphorically in its foundations are revealed. The facade is still beautiful, but it is no longer enough to hide what lies beneath. Elena checks her phone. 3 hours until her flight. Time to head to the airport. She takes one last look around Casera. The ordinary lives unfolding, the quiet persistence of daily existence. Then her eyes lift to the palace in the distance, massive, imposing, solid, yet fragile in its own way. She thinks, nothing is simple. Not buildings, not history, not life. Everything holds contradictions, light and shadow, creation and damage, beauty and cost. The palace has taught her to see that, not with words, not with lectures, not with tidy narratives, but by standing, by enduring, by quietly gathering the weight of stories for centuries. She has absorbed the lesson. She walks toward the train station, toward the airport, toward home, toward whatever comes next, but she carries the palace with her now, not as a perfect postcard image, but as a complicated truth, a story of labor, endurance, invisibility, and care, a story of lives woven into stone and paint. And for Elena, that changes everything. April 2024. 2 weeks later, Elena returns to Casera. The train rolls into the station just after sunrise. Julia is waiting at the palace entrance. They move through the corridors together, quiet, empty, the calm before the first tour buses arrive. The early light is soft, gentle, spilling through the tall windows and spreading across the marble floors like a slow, golden tide. For a moment, the palace is not a monument, not a museum. It is a place where people actually lived, still live, still work. Elena begins shooting. Not the grand staircases, not the sweeping postcards of gilded ceilings. She photographs Luca's hands as he leans over a damaged fresco. Fingers steady, brush barely touching the surface, each movement careful, as if time itself were watching. She frames the brown blooms of water stains spreading across ceilings. She follows the narrow attic stairwell, imagining the servants who climbed it dozens of times a day, carrying laundry, candles, or buckets of water. She captures Julia at her desk, surrounded by invoices and grant applications, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes tired, yet face resolute.
At dawn, Elena walks through the gardens. Fountains lie still, gravel paths stretch empty beneath her feet. The palace reflects across the water of the basins, sharper than stone, a mirror of itself. Over the next week, she listens. She interviews staff, letting them speak about why they stay, what they hope to preserve, what drives them when the work is impossible and the funding never enough. In the evenings, she delves into the past. Antonio Moretti, born 1724, married Maria Constanza in 1750. Daughter Lucia, born 1751, died in 1778 from a construction accident at the royal palace. Only 44 words in a ledger, yet enough to know a life, a labor, a story. Beyond the initials scratched into wet plaster, nothing official remains. And now, Elena's photographs and words will give him presence once again. She searches for Rosa. Servants often left no paper trail, no ledger entry, no portrait. But the spaces they inhabited, the narrow attics, the corridors, the tiny rooms, still exist. Elena climbs into the attic where women like Rosa slept. She measures the bed frames with her camera strap, 20 narrow beds in a room meant for 10. She photographs the low ceiling, forcing a hunch, the iron bed frames packed so tightly there is barely space to move. She documents what history has skipped. On her last day, Elena stands in front of the palace at golden hour. The facade glows, countless windows catching the sinking sun. From afar, it is breathtaking, but she no longer sees only beauty. She sees Antonio falling with the scaffolding, Rosa's hands swollen, bent from endless scrubbing, Caterina and Marco curled on a blanket in a courtyard, shivering on cold marble, Julia hunched over forms, fighting for one more year of funding. She sees cost. She sees care. She sees the quiet refusal, repeated across centuries, to allow something meaningful to die. Elena lifts her camera. She does not shoot in spite of the darkness behind the stone. She shoots because of it. The palace is both dream and burden, masterpiece and monument to suffering, fragile and enduring, beautiful and brutal. It is all of it at once. And only when you see every shadow and every shine together does it finally become whole.